Ever since I was able to walk, playing in the garden and learning about different plants was one of my favorite things to do, which is why for my capstone personal passion project, I decided to create a garden in my backyard. When creating my garden, I wanted to make sure that it was not only benefiting my home, but also the environment around it. I want to include plants that are compatible with the ecosystem. I want to make sure that all these plants are native to California because of the impact they make on the local environment. The benefits are multifold. California's native plants have evolved over hundreds of years to succeed in the state's dry climate, with adaptations for each of their regions. They have relationships with insects and other wildlife, both helping them and benefiting from them. They also nourish the local soil, being able to thrive in many different types, whether it's clay, sand, or serpentine. I started off my journey by researching what types of plants I wanted to grow in my native garden, which I wrote down and further researched in a document. From my thorough research, I decided on 4 plants: sea lavender, common yarrow, hummingbird sage, and Catalina California fuchsias. My next step was to further research each of these native plants, making sure I knew exactly what they needed to survive. The first plant that I decided on is the common yarrow, also known as Achillea millefolium. This plant grows best in sun or partial shade, and in moist, dry conditions, and will not tolerate any wet soil. This is the only plant out of the 4 that requires loamy soil, which is a soil with parts clay, sand, silt, and soil. It grows best in less nutrient soil, since it will overgrow if put in such conditions. It is very good at thriving in California terrain. The next plant I chose is hummingbird sage, also known as Salvia spathacea. This plant grows best in sunny to semi-shaded locations and needs well-drained soil, so mostly moist soil, with low frequent watering in the summer and heavier in the spring. As stated by the article I researched from, these plants will grow in shade but are often impacted by powdery mildew. This is very hard to fight, so I have to accept its presence, plant more in the sun, or avoid overhead watering. I can do this by buying a drip irrigation system instead. The third plant I've chosen for my native garden is sea lavender, also known as Limonium californicum. This plant thrives best in full sun and requires constantly moist soil. This plant does not have any pests or diseases linked to it, but does attract wildlife. It does well in harsh conditions due to it being grown by the sea and can be watered with regular watering methods. The final plant that has been chosen for my garden is the Catalina California fuchsia, also known as Eubalibium canum. This plant is known for its bright scarlet flowers in summer and is often found by seasonal creeks, seeps, and springs. This plant will self-seed, so once its species is established, it will usually start springing up all around your garden. Hence the name. There's probably no better California native plant for attracting hummingbirds. This will be a great addition for my garden because of its ability to attract these animals, and it's a great replacement for the cardinal flower, which was one of my first options but was not chosen due to its toxicity to many wildlife species. This plant requires a fair amount of sun and a medium amount of watering to make sure it doesn't get too wet because of the possibility of root rot. My next step in this process was visiting 2 local nurseries to collect these plants and materials. I then moved on to the planting process. The first part in the planting process was laying the correct soil in each planting section. I was then ready to plant. I started off with the common yarrow, using a method called root tickling to loosen up the soil from the roots for better drainage. I then moved on to sea lavender, using the same tactic of root tickling to establish this plant. And just like that, my first 2 plants were established in my native garden. I made sure to give them bits of plant food to make sure that their roots set in correctly. For the second day of planting, I started to plant the hummingbird sage and the Catalina California fuchsias. I again used the method of root tickling on both the plants to get them ready to be put in the ground. I then placed the plants strategically in the ground, depending on how much sun they needed and placing them accordingly. Once the plants were in the ground, I gave them quick spritz since they were very dry. In the weeks following, I made sure to water the plants very thoroughly because it's the first few weeks of care that matter the most in a plant's root establishment. For the hummingbird sage, I had to use a different watering method since this plant is very prone to mildew. I used an aqua globe instead of a drip irrigation system because they tend to be very expensive. This worked very well on getting water straight to the plant's roots. And just like that, my garden was complete, and all I had to do was sit back, relax, and water my plants. Unfortunately, the squirrels that live in my backyard had taken quite a liking to my yarrow plant. As much as this made me happy to know that local wildlife was benefiting from my garden, I wanted to make sure these plants were fully grown to benefit multiple creatures. I started using diluted peppermint oil and spraying it all over my plants, which was suggested on many blogs for keeping pests away. Unfortunately, with this method, I saw no progress, so I took harsher measures. I built a cage around the plants using chicken wire with holes big enough so that the flowers would be able to poke out, but small enough so that the squirrels weren't able to enter and kill the newly planted plants. Now that the squirrel issue was solved, I had time to watch my plants flourish and start flowering. This not only made me happy, but made me even more curious about my subject. While I watched the progress of the rest of my plants, I decided to spend my time volunteering at one of my favorite California organizations, Tree People. Tree People is a service organization that inspires and supports the people of Southern California to come together and care for plants, harvest the rain, and renew depleted landscapes. Tree People has activated millions of people to plant and care for their native California greenery. During my time volunteering at this organization, I had many wonderful experiences and learning lessons. The first thing we were taught while volunteering was about invasive plants and how harmful they truly are to the environment. They take up space that could be for natives, and their roots can possibly strangle those of native plants. The organizers pointed out invasive species to us while we pulled them out from the roots. We then learned the proper way to plant native plants in an invasive environment. We made sure our planting area was completely free of any invasive species, saplings, or roots, and dug a deep hole and added in our plant. They made sure to tell us to pack the soil in very tight so that there was no air between the roots, which makes it a lot harder for the plant to establish itself. Local California plants are very used to the compact soil, so this is a good method to help your plant root. Since the area we were in had very dry soil, we created a dome of dirt around the plant, giving it lots of water, which it absorbed into its roots. Finally, my experience had come to an end, and we had established our very first native tree. Not only was this experience pleasant and therapeutic, but it was also a great learning lesson for future projects. My experience at Tree People was very enjoyable, and I will definitely be back again soon. A few weeks after my plants had been established, I had walked out to see a full-blown garden. I was ecstatic that my plants had thrived so well. In conclusion, growing a native garden offers numerous benefits for both the environment and the gardener. By choosing plants that are well adapted to the local climate and soil, we can create a sustainable ecosystem that supports native wildlife and conserves water. Additionally, native gardens can enhance the beauty and biodiversity of our communities. Through this project, I have gained a deeper understanding of the importance of native plants and the positive impact they have on our environment. I hope this project inspires others to consider planting native gardens and contributing to the local preservation of our natural land.